New York City in the 1980s was the epicenter of the AIDS epidemic as I was living there for rabbinic school. Every day, the New York Times printed obituaries of creative and talented people, primarily young men, cut down before their time. There was a president in the White House who refused to acknowledge the epidemic or even call the disease by its name, as long as it seemed to affect only those whom he thought of as expendable: intravenous drug users, people in the sex trade, and gay men. Rabbinic and cantorial students volunteered with the Gay Men's Health Crisis, an organization that agitated to get government, both local and federal, interested in policies to stem the crisis. The group also provided counseling and meals for those who were suffering. Once a week, we would take turns serving meals, offering conversation to those who felt shunned by society. Our talented colleagues might even play a piano or guitar and lead singing. New York was still climbing out of a deep economic slump. Some of us began pushing the leaders of the college to let us operate a weekly soup kitchen out of the common room at 4th and Broadway. It was a surprisingly hard sell to the school leadership. Even though students would do the cooking, serving, cleaning, and even the security. Eventually, the moral argument was persuasive, and we began serving. The Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion is a small school. My graduating class was 21 people. We were not more than 100 all in. We were young and ready to change the world. And if we couldn't make a difference for everyone, at least we could make a difference for some. I recruited students to get involved. One declined to participate because she did not feel centered in her own life. I suggested that one of the ways we center ourselves is through action. We don't find ourselves by sitting alone in contemplation and study. We find ourselves by doing something. In helping others, we may find ourselves. It was actually not a particularly fruitful discussion. We were both still students, maybe not so well attuned to listening than to speaking, a problem that afflicts rabbis throughout their careers. It may be particularly acute when we are young and full of ourselves. It felt as if we were on opposite ends of a deep divide. I advocating action even if we are not centered, and she suggesting she could not act until she really knew herself. On reflection, I could have been more generous in my thoughts. It seems now that we had more common ground than either of us could acknowledge. I would still say that action is a way to find yourself, but I have more appreciation for those who see it another way. What I dismissed as navel-gazing back then now seems more like humility in the face of nearly overwhelming complexity. How do we decide what action to take? And what tactics do we bring to the struggle for change? The old adage, if all you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail, applies. There are so many problems facing us today. Climate change is at the top of the list. Our approach to the planet leads not only to lethal storms, but it also can lead directly to a problem like a pandemic. As was true with AIDS, with the H1N1 virus, diseases make the leap from bats and monkeys to us because of deforestation and habitat change. We have political and social problems, including systemic racism. And in the Jewish community, anti-Semitism is a constant worry. We are worried about security when we are together, and worried about the splintering of community when we're apart. These are not just nails that need hammering. Every issue requires a multifaceted approach that is both action and advocacy. A colleague, Rabbi David Jaffe, has written a very helpful book called Changing the World from the Inside Out. All of us could learn something from reading it. It is a winner of the National Jewish Book Award. It is part a personal story and part a workbook for getting to know yourself and your strengths and your passions. It is a way of looking at personal and social change. Our education director, Ashley Plotnick, and I have been teaching a class for the last few weeks based on ideas in the book, and we hope to have the author join us by Zoom later in the year. In the meantime, I urge you to get a copy in whatever way you acquire books. I particularly recommend supporting our local bookstores whenever you can. Rabbi Jaffe makes a nuanced case for what my colleague was trying to say many years ago. Making change is about more than just action. When we know ourselves, our strengths and weaknesses, our motivation, we can be more effective agents of change. To help us understand change and our role in it, Rabbi Jaffe teaches about the interconnectedness of all things. The paradox is that everything is really one big unity, but existence at its core necessitates separation and otherness. We can get confused by this otherness and forget how all creation, and particularly all human beings, are connected to the ultimate source of all value. To live fully means to engage this paradox and be at once completely oneself, unique and distinct, and at the same time cognizant that separation is only an illusion and we are all really connected. While otherness is essential for anything in the world to exist, it is also the root of suffering, oppression, and cruelty. Recognizing and acting on an awareness of the hidden unity and value of all creation, while respecting the need for difference, is key to building a more just and peaceful world. The High Holy Days are meant to be a time of introspection. We have a term for it in Hebrew, heshbon hanefesh. To grow, we need to be aware of our inner life, our feelings, thoughts, and motivations. Sometimes it's important just to be a body, a follower, going along with a rally or a protest just to beef up the numbers and show we care. But it is also important to look at ourselves and see where we can be the most help in making a difference. Rabbi Jaffe points to a specific genre of Jewish teaching called Musar. Ashley is our resident expert in this area. Musar has had an exuberant reawakening in 21st century Judaism, but it began during the golden age of Jews in Spain. Rabbi Bachya ibn Pakuda wrote The Duties of the Heart 1,000 years ago. It is a first try to create practices that lead to ethical development. These teachings emerged all over the Jewish world. They were used by mystics and rationalists alike in an attempt to live up to the idea of being made B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. From the 11th century to the present day, Musar literature and its practitioners have been part of Judaism. Unfortunately, the Shoah was a discontinuity of Jewish life in so many ways. The destruction of people and culture saw the decimation of everything that Jews did and believed in Europe. The practice of Musar nearly disappeared. It took a reawakening and rediscovery to bring these texts back to life, and changing the world from the inside out is an example. Musar speaks to our modern day concerns. As Rabbi Jaffe asks, how do we walk a holy path that integrates deep spiritual awareness and righteous action in the world? We do this through the cultivation of midot in our character. Midah is the singular, midot is plural, and while this word is probably new to some of you, I hope others are a little more familiar. As part of our religious school curriculum, we talk about the midah of the month. When we had our weekly gatherings, we thought of moments when we lived one of the midot. Patience, honor, humility, these are examples of midot that Rabbi Jaffe talks about. And there are many, many more. And we recognize that each of these midot exists on a spectrum. Thinking of humility, one end of the range is arrogance, and on the other is low self-esteem. We want to travel a middle path, recognizing what we need in the moment and responding accordingly. Rabbi Jaffe gives vivid examples of mistakes we make when we get out of balance and successes that come from getting this balance right. As we talk about issues of race, we know that to charge in thinking we have the answers is the height of arrogance. What we need is the midah of humility. Then we can be good allies and help our partners make a difference. If a person in a more powerful societal position expresses pity for someone in a weaker societal position, that pity is often felt as an expression that something is wrong or broken with the individual or community. Lila Watson, part of a group of Aboriginal activists in Australia, sums it up this way: if you're here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. With the proper cultivation of humility, what we say matters, but we don't always have to lead to be effective. One who is appropriately humble neither gets lost in the whole nor sees oneself as the whole. Rabbi Jaffe leans on the greatest storyteller in Jewish history, Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, who teaches us that when we are doing Heshbon HaNefesh, the examination of our own souls, we should not just take account of our shortcomings. We also look to find something good in ourselves. Finding positive examples of these midot in our lives gives us the ability to cultivate what is good in us. When we say al chet, for the sin that we have committed against you, our machzor also has a positive reading, for the good we have done or tried to do. We do need to examine our mistakes and work to do better, but we also need to find the good in ourselves and water those shoots so that they can grow. It is that little green sapling that gives us strength to continue in a world filled with pain and distress. Seeing brokenness is essential for making change, but it can quickly become overwhelming, especially if we can't fix the problems right away. If we make a practice of midot day after day, different parts of our consciousness get to work to achieve our deepest desire. If we say the words of prayer tonight, if we say them often, if they aren't just an empty gesture, then they become a part of us. Think of Hannah in the Haftarah that we'll read tomorrow morning. She prayed to God, weeping all the while. Now Hannah was praying in her heart. Only her lips moved, but her voice could not be heard. This is the model for authentic prayer. And in the story, when Hannah spoke from her heart, change began to happen. It is not God's intervention that is the reason we tell this story over and over. It is to remind us that clarifying and strengthening our motivation can move us toward our goal in surprising ways. Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, something you may have studied in a psychology class in high school or college, tells us that the most basic needs are food and shelter. And then moving up the hierarchy, we come to the need for spirituality and meaning. A friend, an African-American minister, once told me, "How can I expect my community to care about feminism or some other ideal when they're hungry and their rent is due? If we are lucky enough to be secure in our basic needs, then we can focus on other needs." Think of people hoarding toilet paper when the stay-at-home order first started. In moments where we feel urgency or terror, can we bring perspective to bear, or do we impulsively grab what we can? We who are couched in luxury are still servant to our impulsive nature. Only when we recognize our oneness can we get beyond the me first to an other-oriented idea of relationship and community. Then we can think of the greater good. Wearing a face mask does me no harm. I am no less free with a face mask on. Some of us discovered that as we worked at home and went to Zoom meetings, we didn't even really have to wear pants. I discovered I don't particularly like wearing pants, but my freedom is not harmed when I have to wear them. It's for the greater good. It's a minor inconvenience, whether it's a mask or long pants. And seriously, when we see other people or other forms of life simply as instruments of our own gratification, cruelty and oppression are not far behind. When we forget that we are connected souls, we open ourselves to treat others as less than human. Our work in this world is to keep remembering how connected we really are to each other, to all life, to the environment, and to God, so that we couldn't think of causing harm. There are some truly evil people out there who are so disconnected that they willingly harm others, but they are not the norm. There are those who are misdirected, looking to fill their basic needs in any possible way, even if it is lawless. There are those who are trying to be good, but they still see others as the means to their own end, rather than as a part of the oneness of everything. We are lost in many different ways. Just like the sun is always shining behind the clouds, the reality of connection is always there, even when it is obscured by temporary feelings of emotional pain. It's hard to find that good in ourselves sometimes. There are so many messages from our inner voice telling us what's wrong, and we do our best to rise above that noise. And if it's hard to find good in ourselves, how will we find it in others? Can we perceive some good in a person who has done bad to us or to the world? Can it make a difference? It makes a difference to us, and that finding the good in others helps us live life not as a series of grudges and vendettas, but as full and meaningful. And it can make a difference to others. We will never convince someone of anything if we start by condemning them. We know that we are complex and made up of good and bad, but we refuse to see that complexity in others. Seeing that little bit of good in someone can change the way we talk about and approach a person. And when we approach someone with understanding that they are fully human like we are, sometimes they may step up to their highest selves. And even if they don't, our own lives are more rich when we recognize that if we are imperfect but still made in the image of God, then others are like that too. We find ourselves and we take action. We find ourselves through action. These things are really very close together. Seeing holiness in ourselves and others, feeling the connectedness of all people, of all things, makes us grounded, centered, and joyful, and then we are potent agents for growth and change. Change is the effort to shape the ways we live, work, and play together in institutions, communities, and nations to reflect the inherent value of all people and the truth of the deep connectedness of all things. We grow as individuals by noticing and owning our imperfections and aligning our behavior with our ideals. Institutions and societies change when enough people notice and own the imperfections and challenge these imperfections and change these arrangements to align with values like fairness, dignity, and freedom. Just as an individual becomes holy by walking in the ways of God, so too does a society become holy by reflecting the ways of God. We are all in this together. We can change the world from the inside out.